What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, Panthers Advice. Obviously, today, man, we're going to talk about Bryce Young on the hot seat. But before we get into that, before we get into the video, we got to talk about T-Mac, Tedderwall McMillan, and here's why. All right, they drafted him with the 8th overall pick. First half, 5 targets. Second half, I think, 5 or 6 targets, too. They didn't really push the ball deep until, I think, second half, third quarter, 12 minutes left, if I'm not mistaken. You took him with your 8th overall pick. You took him because Bryce Young needed an X. You took him because you're like, he's the best available player. And you're not even really using him, right? All the routes he ran, Luther Burden could have ran. Matthew Golden could have ran. Emeka in Tampa Bay, he definitely could have ran, right? So the Panthers, they don't trade back, right? They're like, okay, T-Mac is our guy. He's 6'5", he's got hands, he's a good route runner too. Use that. This front office is starting to get a little frustrating because we're like, okay, draft the best available player, right? All right. You take Trevor Etienne in the 4th round. You don't really use him either. Now, you could say, okay, it's week 1. You can use that argument for T-Mac. I'll let you have that, right? Maybe I'm overreacting to the T-Mac thing. But, look at Trevor Etienne, who I think is going to be an electric player. However, you signed Rico. You had, I think, Mike Boone on the practice squad, if I'm not mistaken, or at least a couple other running backs. You don't even really use Trevor. You see what Travis Etienne did. 17 for 134, 143, I think. We got to make this make sense. I kind of like their philosophy of drafting the best player available. But at the same time, you draft Trevor and you really don't even use him. And it's hard for me to think that if they were to take a defensive player in that 4th round instead of Trevor, that defensive player wouldn't produce more for the Panthers than Trevor would. Again, I like Trevor, but we have to look at the overall picture, right? The defense needs help. In the 4th round, there's still some solid guys. Jimmy Horn in the 6th round, we're not even going to talk about that because I don't think he saw the field, right? But drafting Trevor in the 4th round and then not even really using him, you're telling me you look at that run defense that we couldn't have got somebody to eventually grow with, right? You got Trevor Etienne, you have Rico, you got Jonathan Brooks on IR. We got to make this make sense. The whole Jimmy Horn thing, I don't even want to get started on that. But the reason I brought up T-Mac is you got to push the ball down the field. There's no reason to get a 6'5" receiver and not push it. Now, with that being said, all right, there will be film study coming out. And maybe I'm potentially overreacting on the T-Mac thing, and I hope that's the case. But for him to get his first deep pass, in the 3rd quarter, late 2nd, I think, 3rd quarter, not a good look. And the whole Trevor Etienne thing in the 4th round, when you've got Brooks, you've got Rico, So those are just my thoughts. Let's jump into the video. Let's talk about Bryce Young. Let's talk about the Panthers offense, the Panthers defense, and where we go from here. So we're going to kick it off. Panthers quarterback Bryce Young talks on his disappointing outing, show of frustration in week 1. Let's dive into this. So for the 3rd time in as many years, Carolina Panthers quarterback Bryce Young had himself a regular season debut to disremember. The latest dud for the former number 1 overall pick came on Sunday as Bryce Young and the Panthers fell in a sloppy 26-10 defeat to the Jacksonville Jaguars. His disappointing performance saw him complete just 18 of his 35 passing attempts for 154, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Young, who also lost a fumble in the afternoon, was asked what he has to do to take better care of the ball. Just better decision-making, he replied. I can't turn the ball over like that, cost the team. I have to be better than that. Just better decision-making. Now, as we talk about Bryce Young right here, he's my guy, but this is the 3rd year in a row where you're making mental mistakes. It seems like later on in the season, he figures it out, right? But you can't go into year 3 making the same mistakes you made your rookie and sophomore year. Now, with that being said, I thought the play calling was pretty conservative, but I still can't excuse his actions, right? Trying to force that ball into Leggett. Kind of reminds me last year, right? Trying to force that ball to Deontay Johnson. Unless he's being told to, all right, there's no excuse for it. Bryce Young, you can't keep doing that. Then the fumble. Just slide, right? Just slide. Take the points. It's like he keeps trying to go back to his college and high school days, trying to make something out of nothing. That worked back then, but Bryce Young, year 1, year 2, you've seen it's a different level. Now, with all that being said, I'm not going to excuse Bryce Young, but this is why I wish he played in preseason. Dave has been such a big advocate for these joint practices. My thing is, when it comes to the offense, I wasn't really worried about what Tedderwall could do, what Chuba can do. We've seen that. I want to see what can Bryce Young do this year, right? You said you opened the playbook. Let's see, can he handle you opening the playbook, which I also don't think he opened the playbook. They were pretty conservative, but, it's about Bryce Young today. And as I circle back to the joint practices, Dave Canales has to remember that Bryce Young, the way he's going to process things in a joint practice compared to preseason is completely different. And that joint practice, he's got that red jersey. They can't touch him. He can be kind of careless with the ball, right? A preseason game, it's a little bit different. Now, obviously, you don't want to get him hurt, right? I get that. But at the same time, you got to get this out of his system. Trying to play hero ball week 1, week 2, week 3, instead of just doing enough to do his part, right? Isn't that Dave's whole mantra, right? Do your part 1 out of 11. So for Bryce Young, I'm not making an excuse. This is pathetic, right? Year 3, you're still making the same mistakes that you're making in year 1. Yes, he threw his helmet. He was frustrated. I get that. And I would be happy to see that if he wasn't making the same mistakes that he just made the previous 2 years. Let's keep it going. So obviously, Bryce Young, he threw 2 picks. There was a fumble. All right, almost 3 picks. All right, but include that with turnover on downs. Carolina handed the rock over 5 times to Jacksonville. And I got to say, the defense wasn't great run defense-wise, but even with all that happening with the offense, all the bad stuff, it was never really too far out of reach. If Tedoroa catches that one in the end zone, it's 10-20. So props to the defense, man. All right, props to the defense. And as we keep it going, one of those would have been a pick 6, like I said before, but it got wiped out by a defensive holding penalty. And they talk about Bryce Young slamming down his helmet. I would be happy to see that, but you keep making the same mistakes you made the last 2 years. All right, I'm glad you're not laughing on the sideline anymore, but we can't keep making those same mistakes. Let's keep it going. So Young addressed his active frustration, just something that was going on with not executing. He said, when you're not executing, it sucks, but I have to do better as a leader. In Bryce Young's 3 career week 1 starts, Young has connected on 50% of his throws for 460 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions over a trio of blowout losses. Now, I'm not going to put too much emphasis on the yards. If you look around the league, all right, nobody's really throwing for a lot of yards. Go back to last year when Andy Dalton came in, he was the first quarterback to throw for 300 yards. So the yards I'm not too concerned about. That's just the way defenses are playing nowadays. If you're focused on yards, you got to watch other NFL games. However, 6 interceptions. 6 interceptions. It's not a good look. Only 2 touchdowns. Now, yes, it seems to be run-first offense, but 2 touchdowns on 6 interceptions, man, it's not a good look. And before we move on, there's something else I want to address real quick. And that's going to be his active frustration. Let's go back to full camera real quick for this. Now, the frustration, I think, if I'm not mistaken, was one of the turnover on downs in the 3rd quarter, right? Where Bryce Young came over, he slammed his helmet down. The reason I'm addressing this one is this goes back to play calling with Dave Canales, okay? 3 plays trying to run the ball, it didn't work, right? The run game really wasn't working in the second half, okay? And Dave kept trying. And that whole time, if I'm not mistaken, and it's hard to see sometimes with that TV angle, you had Tedoroa one-on-one on the outside, single high safety. When I say single high safety, I mean he was playing middle field. You had Tedoroa lined up on the outside. No safety over there, one-on-one. If you drafted this man, you have to take chances with him. It's no different than Bryce Young, right? You drafted Bryce Young, you got to play him do or die. And if the Panthers draft another quarterback, it's the same thing there. You drafted T-Mac with the 8th overall pick. He's one-on-one with a DB who I guarantee was not 6'5", probably not even 6'2", and maybe not even 6'1". Give this man a shot. 4 downs, and you don't go to him once, right? And then the frustrating thing was this right here. Run, go to empty, 5-man protection, no 6, no 7-man protection. Well, the offensive line was kind of getting destroyed at that point, right? And Bryce Young panicked, right? He's going to roll it to his left, ends up throwing it away, even though he could have hit Sanders. Run, and then empty? You had Tedoroa lined up one-on-one. Take a chance with him. Yes, Bryce Young played like crap once again. But you have to call it the coaching too. You can't take someone with 8th overall pick and then do that right there. Let's keep it going. We're going to touch a little bit on this article right here by Darren, okay? Some of it touched on what we just talked about, but some of it's talking about other things I want to talk about real quick, including this right here. Austin Corbett on the snaps. Oh my, woo, boy. Like I said, Bryce Young is definitely at fault here, but my gosh, the amount of snaps that were to the left, to the right, over Bryce Young's head was ridiculous. All right, and then they made a big play, Austin Corbett, ineligible man downfield. Again, Bryce Young played like crap. I'm not disregarding that at all. But the snaps were awful. All right, they were probably the worst they've been since maybe his rookie year, and even then they were probably worse throughout the whole game. I don't even understand how that even happened, to be honest with you. Austin Corbett, man, probably his worst game as a Carolina Panther, to be honest. Let's keep it going, though. But we had to address that. I almost forgot about it. I'm glad it's there in the article. Let's talk about what Corbett said real quick. All right, frustration, didn't protect the ball, didn't hold up in the run well enough, didn't hold up well in the pass, and we made it hard on the defense to be able to get stops, giving them some good field position. So overall frustration. I go back to 2 years ago when the Jaguars, I mean, they dominated the Panthers pretty good 2 years ago too, right? You had Trayvon Walker, you had Josh Hines-Allen. You know, fast forward 2 years later, those players have progressed. What was going to be different between now and then, right? You still have Taylor on the outside. You now have Yosh instead of Icky. Corbett wasn't playing great. I mean, what did he think was going to change, right? So he kept trying to force the run. At some point, Dave has to adapt, right? Put the ball in Bryce's hands. If you want a new quarterback, then show the world that Bryce Young isn't it. But to keep trying, run, it's not going to work, man. It's not going to work. All right, let's keep it going, though. As we wrap this thing up, I want to look at the stats real quick, kind of compare Trevor Lawrence, Bryce Young, defense, and so on and so forth, right? So look at Bryce Young, 18 for 35, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. Look at Trevor Lawrence. Overall, I thought he played decent. He took one risk trying to hit Travis Hunter over the top, and J.C. Horn, man, with an amazing interception. So he went 19 for 31, 178, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Then we look at the rushing. Chuba Hubbard, 16 carries, 57 yards. Travis Etienne, 16 carries, 143. In that big run that Travis had for 71, the laziness on the defense, right? That'll be in the film study too. 16 carries, 57. 16 carries, 143. Who won the line of scrimmage? That's not hard to see, right? It's not hard to see. Let's take a look at receiving real quick. First thing to look at is Tetaroa. All right. Like I said before, he had 5 targets in the first half. That means he only had 4 targets in the second half. 4 targets in the second half. And like I said, I don't think his first deep pass came until the second half anyway. This has to improve, right? At least by 3, if not 4 or 5, to be honest, right? Chuba Hubbard, 3 catches, 32 yards. Jatavion, 2 catches, all right, 3 targets. Renfro. This shocked me a little bit, to be honest. I mean, it did and it didn't, because it felt like he was kind of taking Adam Thielen's place. 2 catches on 6 targets. Now, Bryce Young kind of sold a couple of those. But my thing is, can we try and throw Jimmy Horn in there? Can we try and put Jimmy Horn? I mean, it goes back to what I said about Trevor Etienne. You drafted him in the 4th round when I think a defensive player that we would have drafted could have produced more, right, just based on the depth we have. 6th round, you can make that same argument the way they're not playing Jimmy Horn. Give Jimmy a shot, man. Just give him a shot. Right? You look at Leggett. 7 targets, 3 catches. I mean, this is just rough all the way around. All right, you got Rico, 2 for 3, and you got Tommy Tremble, 1 for 1. So, I mean, the numbers speak for themselves, right? And then defensively, the biggest shocker they came to me, or I guess biggest 2 shockers, was Lathan and DJ Wanham. DJ Wanham didn't have a single tackle, right? And go back to the run game real quick. Take a look at this. The Jacksonville Jaguars will take out Trevor Lawrence. So they run it 16, 5, 21, plus 3, 24, 25 times. And you go to right here. You see DJ Wanham. Unless he didn't play a lot, let me know in the comments if DJ Wanham just didn't play a lot. He had 0 tackles and 1 pass deflected. 0 tackles as an edge. And then I look at Lathan Ransom right here. 1 tackle. And I don't know how much him and Damani actually played behind Nick Scott and Trayvon, right? Because Trayvon led the team with 11 tackles. Christian, second with 8. Trevin, he didn't play great if I'm being honest. He got sucked in on a lot of runs. Definitely out of position. Nick Scott had 5. Mike J had 4. Derek Brown 4. Tershon 4. And I thought Tershon actually played good, to be honest. All right, on that defensive line. I know Derek Brown's getting double teamed. Like I said, the defense for the most part, I thought they played good considering the circumstances of what the offense did, right? So let me know your thoughts. That's going to wrap it up. Panthers advice is out. We got a lot of film study and stuff coming up later this week. Stay tuned for that. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Take it easy. Peace.